Hello and welcome to Speak Up, Listen Up, Follow Up, the podcast from the National Guardian's office. In our latest episode, Dr. Jayne Chidgey-Clark, National Guardian to the NHS, speaks to Sir Robert Francis, whose recommendations in the Free Guardians and the National Guardian role. As Sir Robert steps down as chair of the National Guardian Office Accountability and Liaison Board, he reflects on the impact of freedom to speak up and his thoughts of priorities for the future.
There is a moral duty to speak up, which is respected and supported and celebrated.
We hope you enjoy this episode, and now over to Jayne.
Good afternoon, Sir Robert.
Hello.
It's absolutely great to have you here this afternoon in the next of our series of podcasts, and really important to have an opportunity to reflect with you after all the years you've been involved in freedom to speak up. And I wonder if I could start, because in my podcasts, I often ask people what freedom to speak up means to them, and I wonder if you could tell our listeners what it means to you.
Sure. Well, I suppose my first encounter with what unhappily was the opposite of freedom to speak up was at the Mid-Staffordshire freedom to speak up was at the Mid-Staffordshire inquiry, and I came across far too many examples of staff who wanted to raise issues of real concern for the benefit of patients, and either being ignored or worse, being they were trying to do something for their patients, and in one notorious case to the extent of being physically threatened by colleagues. Almost worse than that was the fact that people were told not to report things because they were so common they shouldn't be reported. So that was that, they shouldn't be reported. So that was that experience. And then I was asked to do the Freedom to Speak Up review, which I insisted on being called the Freedom to Speak Up review, not a whistleblowing review, because even before listening to people, I thought this was people felt free to say what was on their minds rather than it being something exceptional called whistleblowing. But what I found there was quite astonishing to my mind. I heard from people who lost their jobs because in good faith they'd raised concerns about patient safety, people who became so depressed because of the way they were treated, they were on the verge of committing suicide. Things were that bad. And the result of this was quite clearly that the service, the health service, was missing out on learning really important information, crucial importance to patients, their safety, and indeed the well-being of colleagues as well. So for all those reasons, I thought freedom to speak up was really, really important. And it wasn't just about the courage required to say really important things. It was actually about the more mundane level, that nurses weren't being listened to by surgeons in operating theatres, managers were not being listened to by their superiors, about little things sometimes. But the whole of the time, it seems to me that as long as people don't feel it's normal to raise a concern about what's happening in their workplace, the workplace is going to be really unsafe. And underlying all that was somehow we had to get rid of the fear that people have about the consequences, the adverse consequences of speaking up. And just finally, I know this is a long answer, but one of the first people I met at Mid-Staffordshire when I went round the place at the beginning of my first inquiry there as a nurse, I more or less cornered the poor lady and asked her what it was like there. And she began to tell me about something that had happened in her ward, quite positive actually. She had made a change which had made a difference. But all the time she was speaking to me, she was looking around her nervously, and she kept on saying, "I can't believe I'm saying this." And so to my mind, freedom to speak up is for that and for people like her to feel when they talk about things that have either gone right or wrong, they can feel some pride in doing that, not fear. And if we can achieve that even a little bit, we will have made progress.
Absolutely. That's a really helpful context. That's a really helpful context from where it started and what you were hearing, what was in your mind. And I guess 7 years on, Robert, from publishing your Freedom to Speak Up review, can I ask you what you're most proud of?
The thing I'm most proud of in relation to that and the network you lead, the idea that we now have as an accepted part of everyday life in virtually everywhere within at least the hospital sector and spreading out into the community, we hope. The Freedom to Speak Up Guardian plus the network of ambassadors or whatever else people are called, seems to be something that cannot now be taken away. There's obviously a variation through the system about how Freedom to Speak Up Guardians can work, but work they do, caseloads that you tell us they're undertaking just show that. And their very existence is a symbol of the commitment to the service and of the particular employers they work within to Freedom to Speak Up. And so they act as that symbol, but they also act as a warning when things are going wrong, when their work is being obstructed, that something is going wrong, time before the organisations they work in are become another Mid Staffordshire. So I think that as a system, to have that in place is really important as a cultural change within the NHS. That is far from saying the work is complete, and sad to say, Jayne, far from saying the work is complete. And sad to say, Jayne, you and your colleagues throughout the country will be in a job for years to come, I'm afraid, but because you'll be needed. But the fact that you're there means that we'll never go back to the really dark days throughout the service that we had before.
And you highlighted it in the review and your recommendation to have this role of Freedom to Speak Up Guardians is that additional route to speaking up if people can't speak up to their line managers or to HR or to patient safety or to those other routes, and they're all valuable. But clearly what you were hearing at Mid-Staffs was that those more traditional routes weren't being used, hence why you made your recommendation. And as you say, the number of cases, we now have over 950 guardians across England in a myriad types of organisations. And now, since the inception of the role, the number of cases they've handled is in excess of, I think, over 70,000 cases that wouldn't necessarily have gone other places. And so absolutely, hopefully preventing situations occurring and helping that worker and patient safety, which is clearly, key to what the Guardian role is. So I guess you made a number of recommendations in that review, and I was wondering whether, given what you're most proud of, are there areas that you feel we haven't made as much progress on yet as you would like to see?
Well, I think one of the areas that we need to make more progress in is what happens when things have, despite our best efforts, gone wrong. And I think that a sign of that can be, for instance, that the first we hear of a problem is an employment tribunal. Quite startling evidence sometimes is given, not only about the original incident where someone has raised an issue and then been victimised, sometimes terribly, for it, but the attitude of the organisation that then follows when a complaint is made about that. So I often wonder about that. So I often wonder how it comes about that despite your work, my work, and the general plea from throughout the system for respecting the freedom to speak up, that there still seems to be amongst some parts of the leadership within, they have to defend almost the indefensible in a legal context. And I'm not sure that there's enough accountability attached to that when it turns out to have been the wrong thing to do, because quite often it looks to me as though it should always be apparent it was the wrong thing to do, to continue to apparent it was the wrong thing to do, to continue to resist accepting that someone had been treated badly, as opposed to immediately trying to put right the fact that they had been treated badly. So I would think we haven't made enough progress about how to deal with the aftermath of things when they've gone. I only made about the duty of candour and transparency, which is the spirit behind, which is when something's gone wrong, accept that it's gone wrong, learn the lessons from it, put things right, and then move on, instead of continually denying the undeniable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the message that hands out, undeniable.
Yeah, absolutely.
The message that hands out is terrible, and I do think that leads to a negative culture very quickly indeed if it's not stamped up.
Yeah, and we've had, high-profile cases this year of that, Robert, haven't we? And, I'm very mindful that business ethics echoes that. Our guardians tell us that the two biggest reasons why people don't speak up are the fear of futility. There's no point. No point mentioning around here because nothing will change, nothing will happen. And I know you described that at the very beginning as part of what you were hearing back in the early days of the mid-staffs review. But the other is that fear of detriment, fear of reprisal, fear of retribution, whatever word we want to use. And when we look at what guardians are telling us, there still is a sort of a pretty stubborn percentage of cases that people are reporting that then suffer detriment as a result of raising a matter that is getting in the. And I just wonder, from your view, have you got any messages to us as what we can be doing more to move that dial and improve that, because it clearly is a leadership challenge across the system and within individual organisations?
Well, I think the first point is that I've noticed in the what's now quite a number of years that I've been involved sitting on the board of the CQC, helping with the National Guardian's Office and so on, that there's nowhere in the system that is capable of really looking. If they haven't looked into a case properly as an individual, there's nowhere else for the individual to go where that case is going to be looked into again. I mean, we all had across our desks hugely complicated cases, which would take a lot of resource, it has to be said, to really get to the bottom of. And there are a lot of organisations that say, well, thank you for your information, we'll take that into account. But no one actually deals with the individual case. And which means that the only remedy the individual has is to go to an employment tribunal, which is a ghastly experience for all concerned, costly in terms of not just resource, but cost to people's emotions and well-being is immense as well. And I just feel there must be a better way of dealing with that. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I don't think the number of cases falling into this category is so large that they couldn't be managed. So I would say that unless we are to increase the number of people many of whom are well known publicly, who feel they have suffered injustice and have not had a remedy for it, will increase. And the more there are of such people, the more others will be discouraged from speaking up. I know that's not as widely accepted, but it happens to be my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Robert. And, I know, having reaching the end of my first year as the National Guardian, that I'm all too aware of that effect that these cases may have, and as you say, the impact on the individuals. So I guess what your message I'm hearing is that we can't ignore this, and we need to keep talking within the system about where responsibility and accountability for looking at those cases will.
It's the same actually issue for when a patient can experience, but unless it is tackled, and there are various organisational ways I think it could be, a lot is being missed, because actually the system has an aversion to dealing with cases on an individual basis, because they always want to look at the picture. But some of the cases and the descriptions you and I are aware of, you do not need more than one case to be told that something is really wrong and needs to be handled differently, because if it's happened to one person, unfortunately it's likely to have happened to many more anyway.
Absolutely, thank you so much, Robert. Absolutely, thank you so much. Robert, sadly, and it is sad, as you step down from your Chair of Healthwatch and also your involvement as a lead in our Accountability and Liaison board, I know you'll be keeping a keen eye on how the Freedom to Speak Up works. So I wonder, from your perspective, is there anything you'll be particularly looking out for? Is there some stuff you particularly want us to make more movement and more traction on?
Well, clearly we need to spread the spirit and the application of the Freedom to Speak Up agenda throughout the health system. And I know you're doing great work in seeking to do that, but obviously there are particular challenges around care, community services of one sort or the other, and the sort of smaller units about how one actually provides this safety valve there. And then there is the almost unknown land in this sense of social care, and perhaps in a smaller way, but also independent healthcare setting. And I think it's important, if we are a service, which is the aspiration, isn't it, that the same conditions of freedom to speak out have to exist in every part of the system. And that also includes not only the direct providers of whatever the service is, but also the providers to them, because actually I've got seen cases where information of concern is in the hands of, say, a supplier of goods or the delivery driver to a hospital who sees things that they shouldn't do. Dare I say it, infamously, concerns about doctor shipment were first raised in the undertakers by the undertakers who didn't know where to go. So there needs to be a sort of more widespread acceptance of this agenda, and the fact that where something concerns patient safety, or indeed public money, if you like, there is a moral duty to speak up, respected and supported and celebrated. And if that requires guardians, so be it. But I think that the principles in my report, which obviously extend beyond guardians, need to be more widely adopted. And actually, I think there is evidence that in sectors outside that, there's an appetite for this sort of thing. It's the fact that I know your predecessor, have frequently asked to go and speak and talk to other sectors, and that's to be welcomed. So that's I think what I'd like to see.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and I'm very glad to hear there's no surprises from you in there as to where you want to see continued development, and absolutely my commitment and our commitment.
Much to do with it, Jayne, really.
Absolutely. Robert, thank you. And there's something that triggered in my mind there, just to remind our listeners that triggered in my mind there, just to remind our listeners that we take learning and we share our learning from our experience in the health system through a pan-sector network for freedom to speak up. And we have banking, we have aviation, we have the military, we have it reaches everywhere. Anyone in any organisation should have the psychological safety and the roots to speak up about what gets in the way of them doing their job and what would improve the safety, the excellence, the all those areas of that service, and it's something that we're very committed to learning more from. And I guess I wanted just to reflect that we actually had an inquiry as far as Australia to the office yesterday to take the learning from what we have through the work that your review instigated to another country, and we have other countries who've done that, but I think the furthest field will be this inquiry from Australia, and obviously we're delighted to share our learning, and we're on a journey ourselves. I spend a lot of time speaking with boards and leaders and guardians and frontline workers, and what they tell me consistently is that this is tough, because it's an ongoing journey, and to change cultures. And as you've talked about, the Guardian being that early warning system and being embedded in an organisation to be able to have those open, constructively challenging conversations with leadership, relating data from all the different sources, HR, patient safety, what's coming through the Guardian route, because we never envisaged, and I know you never envisaged, that the Guardian route would replace other routes, but it would be that valuable additional, as you call it, the sort of the safety valve almost. So I just wanted to reflect on that, and I guess as we're coming to the end of our time, you may be stepping down from these current roles. I know you'll be going on to other things, but I know, because it feels like to me it's in your DNA, that you'll be actively promoting freedom to speak up. So I have a final question for you before we finish, and that's to ask you.
Well, it may sound a bit cliched, but I would hope that I would, in whatever roles I have in the future, whether in the health service or elsewhere, feel the ability to speak truth to power, because I think in the end that's what raising concerns is about. That's what raising concerns is about, or what it feels like anyway. And I think that we all have to practice what we preach, actually. So in my case, I think that's what I have to continue to do: speak truth to power.
So knowing that you're going to be doing that and taking that into whatever takes you into the future, I want to, on work, which is now over 950, and all the leaders across the health service, to thank you for the work that you've done over the last 7 years and before that, in terms of the reviews, to speak truth to power, to shine that light and to say it's got to improve, and this is this is some ideas of how we can do that, which we're working through.
There's just one thing I'd like to add, Jane, before we finish, which is to ask you to pass on my thanks to the Guardians Network, I've met so many of them, they're all fantastic people doing, in some cases, a really difficult job. Sometimes it's a pretty lonely place they're in. But I'd like to express my appreciation for what they do, which undoubtedly has an impact on the well-being and lives of patients and service users throughout the system, and the well-being of staff. And they remain a symbol of the Freedom to Speak Up movement. It is a movement, and I'd just like to thank them for all they do in sometimes very difficult circumstances, and it's much appreciated. Thank you.
Robert, thank you for your time today, and thank you for all you've done. I think some people have likened you to me when I started this role as the father of freedom to speak up. I don't know whether you like that analogy or not, but
that makes me sound even older than I am. But thank you very much, and it's been a privilege and a pleasure to talk to you today.
Thank you, and we wish you well in the future. Thank you,
Robert, for taking the time to come on our podcast. Thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. We welcome your feedback, so please like, rate and comment. Thank you for listening.